Hello, welcome to the last Mansfield Public Talk of this term, where our Mansfield educated alum Martha Swales is going to talk about her new book, Give It a Grow. I'm not going to tell you too much about Martha because I think she's going to do a little bit of that in the context of the talk. But she's a very distinguished gardener and broadcaster and has also got her book into the Sunday Times bestseller list next week, I think, or it'll be forthcoming. So if you want to join the throng, then there are some books for sale afterwards. But first of all, Martha's going to talk for a little while about her life and her book and how human sciences got her there, and then we'll take some questions from me and you. Thank you very much, Martha. Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a sip of water just to, settle my nerves. Thank you for coming to my talk. I was at Mansfield 2007-2010, and actually some of my dear friends who were here with me are in the audience today and have come from London for it, so thank you very much. Mansfield holds a really special place in my heart, and I always feel really at home when I arrive back here, and I think it's a really welcoming environment, and with Helen I think it's actually becoming an increasingly welcoming and inclusive place, and I think, although I'm biased, the best college in Oxford. In fact, when I was here, I was really into rowing, so I'd just like to say my name is still on the blades that hung in the old JCR from when we got blades, I think, every summer 8 that I was here. So for anyone who's actually a student knows what that means, it's a big deal, and for everyone else, don't worry. I was back here about 6 months ago for a reunion known as a Gordy. Actually don't know why it's called that, but here we are, and I ended up sat 2 seats away from Helen. And as we got chatting, she said, I think I recognise you. I follow you on Instagram, which is a weird thing that seems to be happening to me more and more lately. But I told her that I had written a book, and she asked me if I'd come and do a talk. And after a champagne reception and several glasses of wine, this is the talk that I agreed to do, so just hang in there. So I did human sciences when I was here, and I am a TV producer. I've written a list of what I am here, as though I can't remember it myself, but human sciences alumni, TV producer and director, a gardener, and most recently a social media content creator, and, dare I say it, apparently best-selling author. And I'm talking a little bit today about my time here and my career and how I got to the point that I'm at, but I also mainly want to leave with the message that I think that gardening can change your life, and I imagine if you're here, some of you agree. I don't mean in a rapid or dramatic way, but if you'll forgive the pun, in a way that I think gradually grows into something that's deeply important. I think it can make us feel better, care more, eat well, and mend our relationship with nature and ourselves at the same time. I first started growing food, that was my journey into gardening, at the age of 21, quite shortly after I finished Oxford. And 2.5 years ago, I moved into a flat with my gorgeous friend Charlie, who came to Mansfield with me. And the one thing that I said when we were looking around was, it needs to have a garden. And do you know what? I'm so grateful I said that, because it has actually changed my life. After many years working in telly as a TV producer, I turned my hand to my favourite hobby, and I started making content about, I say, it is my garden, it's our garden, but really it's mine. Although I always make sure there's a space for the sun lounger to go out so Charlie can lie in the sun in the summer. It's only 5 by 8 metres, and since I started making content about my garden, I now have 1.75 million followers across different social media platforms, and I've made over 30 reels that have been viewed more than 1 million times, which is kind of crazy, but I'm obviously very happy about it. And off the back of that, I've come to write my first book, Give It a Grow, which is full of simple projects to nurture food, flowers and wildlife in any outdoor space. And I think the reason that I wanted to write it is because I believe there isn't a certain kind of gardener that you're supposed to be, or a certain kind of garden. And I think that it can seem really intimidating and bound by loads of rules. But actually, if you just have a few things to get you started, you can do one thing and learn something and fall in love with gardening in a way that I think might just change your life. So, my content falls broadly into two categories. I kind of do simple, accessible tips like how to grow microgreens in a sardine tin. And I also definitely lean into kind of romanticising my lovely garden and showing what you can do in a space that is small. I live on a council estate, ground floor maisonette. And yeah, I think I'd like to say that especially in the summer, it is like a little kind of utopia. I wanted to show you a reel, although I will hate to watch it myself, just to kind of give you a bit of context if you've never seen any of the content that I do. And for people that are interested in social media and like, I suppose, the algorithm and what is successful on social media, this, I suppose, is my most successful piece of content. I gained 100,000 followers just off this single reel, and it's been watched, well, 7 million times on Instagram, but actually loads more than that, even though that sounds quite awful of me. Anyway, but the reason I want to show it is because I think it must have struck a chord with people, and that is what I've been trying to do. So, let's see if this works, because I'm actually not very good with technology, so... Okay, that's the title card of my talk. Let's go, here we go. So this is the garden.
What can a garden be? 2 years ago I started building this garden, and I documented every step of the way because I wanted to show people what you can achieve in the smallest of spaces, even when you don't have a lot of time. I broke it down into little projects, no drastic changes, just one piece at a time, and then I started to grow food. In my first spring I harvested lush spinach and a beautiful bouquet of radishes, and in the blink of an eye my garden erupted into life, full of flowers, unruly and abundant, and with food hidden in every corner. My garden became a treasure trove full of jewels. Cucamelons, an archway laden with beans, pink berries, chilies, physalis, glossy aubergines, an abundance of tomatoes. As that first year came to an end, I used winter for more projects, to assess, to make new plans. I don't want my garden to be finished because it is the doing that I love so much. Then a new spring came around. I finally got a greenhouse. What if you could make a garden that could feed you and your imagination? That every time you step outside your door there's something new to see, pick and fall in love with. An ever-changing landscape that follows the ebbs and flows of the seasons, that can give you food that fills you with a pride you can't buy, that you can take into your kitchen and inspires you to cook food that nourishes your soul. I want people to step into their garden and not be afraid to start, but be excited about what they could create. That is what a garden can be.
Okay, so that's that. I'm just going to go back to this now because there's actually no more pictures to look at until later on in the talk, so you're just going to have to listen to me, I'm afraid. Yes, that video really struck a chord with people, and I have kind of imagined why that might be. And I think we often underestimate the potential of something like a small garden when we think that other people have a bigger garden, a better one, and we aren't the right kind of gardeners. But as I said earlier, I'm hoping to show people that you don't have to be any kind of gardener to start gardening. You just have to actually do it. And that's the only predisposition. So in a society so detached from nature and where our food comes from, I also think that growing your own food can seem like a kind of magic. And showing people that it's possible is kind of what I want to do. Also, I am actually a perpetually dissatisfied person by nature, and I think that's maybe something that people who have been to Oxford or go to Oxford or just general people in life can relate to. It's a feeling of never being enough, never doing enough. You should always be achieving more. And I think it's made worse perhaps by the kind of sedentary nature of our work, toiling away, doing things that sometimes seem to have no tangible outcome. And so if that sounds like something you can relate to, then I think a garden is a very good remedy. And it's a gift that it gives me on a daily basis to take pleasure in small things and to untangle myself from a busy and critical mind and be in awe of nature, science, culture, and human imagination meeting in a little patch outside my back door. Gardening, I think, as a human scientist, is just about the most human science thing that you can do. And it is an act of doing, being, and imagining all at once. So this leads very nicely onto the bit of the talk where I talk about a degree called Human Sciences, which is what I did whilst I was here, as did my friend Sarah, who was my tutorial partner, along with Sonia, who's not here. And I was actually at Mansfield 19 years ago. And I picked human sciences simply because I thought it sounded interesting. And I have never been somebody who has a plan, and I'm still not. I liked variety, I was good at science, and I thought Oxford looked really very exciting and impressive coming from a state school as I did. I just thought, wow, that looks so glamorous. And in fact, it really was. Looking back now, it kind of makes perfect sense because just doing whatever I thought was interesting at the time has been the foundation for everything that I've done in my career. After uni, I followed a lifelong love of food into a career making food television. And I have occasionally flirted with the idea of being a bit more strategic. And during a career crisis in my mid-20s, I rang up a friend of mine who is a very successful corporate lawyer who sat over there, and I said, Nick, maybe I should become a management consultant. And he said, no, it's not a good idea. And I'm really grateful for his honesty, and he was definitely right. So actually I went back to telly. And when I went back after a summer driving vans for a female removal company, I liked it a lot more, and my career definitely kind of improved after that. But back to human sciences, a degree where 1 minute you're trying to master statistics, which incidentally I never did, but you only need to get 40% to pass in the first year, and that's what I got. And the next minute learning about why a vampire bat will share its meal with a friend and what that says about whether true altruism exists or not. The human ecology of the transmission of tropical diseases like schistosomiasis. For some reason, that one always really stuck in my head. Probably because it's got actually something to do with snails, if you're interested to know. Anyway, being a human scientist, and I say being because I think it's something that you are rather than something that you do. And I just actually had a coffee with my tutor that was my tutor when I was here, and I said that to him, and he loved it, and he agreed. Anyway, the most important thing about human sciences and the relevance it has to gardening is that it teaches you to see connections, and it gives you different perspectives on the same thing. To study human sciences is to study fruit flies, the evolution of early humans, animal behaviour, the genetics of cancer, the importance of soil, climate change, population change, anthropology, and what impact a pandemic might have on life expectancy. Yes, we knew that was coming. And indeed how cooking might have made us human. Of all the subjects that I studied when I was here, there was one that resonated with me particularly, and I think really makes sense in the context of having come back round to gardening, and that was biological conservation, which I've got to say was pretty bleak then, and I'm sure is not any better now. Each week I would leave my lectures a little more aware of the depletion of the ocean, loss of soil, potential outcomes of runaway climate change, and I remember one tutorial where my tutor was telling me how devastated she was to find out how much palm oil there was in flora after how many years she's dedicated herself to being a vegan. I myself actually fell into quite a severe anxious and depressive episode, but I did get a first in biological conservation. So that will become relevant later on, but I'm going to move on to what I did after uni next. But hold in your mind the idea that it can seem really bleak out there, and that it's good to have a practical solution to the feeling of being helpless. So after university, I did two things. I started a career in television, and I took up gardening as a hobby. And I have come to discover, actually, that human sciences and TV go hand in hand as well. I met a human scientist who series produced Frozen Planet, and later a boss of a television company that I worked at. So it kind of makes sense. And I went into it for the same reason that I did human sciences, which is that I thought it sounded interesting, I thought it was going to be full of variety, and I just didn't want to get bored, because boredom is very familiar to me, and I'm always trying to escape it. My first job in telly was as a runner on Bargain Hunt, a job that I was so delighted to get that I moved at a week's notice from London to Bristol. I was living with my parents, and by the time they got back from holiday, I wasn't there anymore. My job was to pack the fleeces into boxes and to make tea and read weekly magazines to the contestants, which I really enjoyed, actually. And then my first proper job in television was as a researcher on a BBC4 food history show with a lady called Clarissa Dixon-Wright, who was one of the two fat ladies. I imagine there are people in the audience who have no idea who they are, but they were icons, and you should look them up. Soon, I was getting one TV job to another, Great British Menu, Wales Bake Off, a BBC Science series that took me to Istanbul to film the late Michael Mosley eating lamb's brains next to the rooftop of the Blue Mosque, a trip to Peru where I got to see bean to bar chocolate being made in the rainforest, Mediterranean islands with Yotta Motolengi, where a man whose yard was full of kittens milked his goats on a skateboard and in a stone hut turned it into the best cheese I have ever had in my life that I actually wrapped up in many layers of cling film and took back in my suitcase. On Food Unwrapped, I ended up in the world's largest smoked fat salmon factory near Gdansk in Poland, and I was given a boom, although I wasn't a soundie, and I managed to hit myself on the head with the boom in front of the presenter who thought it was really funny. And at 28, I got my first kind of break in telly, I think. I directed a 10-part series around the Middle East with John Torode, and we travelled all over Egypt, from Alexandria to Aswan, via Cairo, Luxor and the Red Sea, and then to Bahrain, Dubai, and strangely Malta, but you've really got to go where the tourist boards are going to give you money. I spent several weeks staying in a beautiful house in Provence with Michel Roux and his wife Giselle, cooking classic French recipes. And I was in the room when Nigella said, microwave. TV can be a chaotic industry. You're always looking for your next job, everything is last minute, and people are always expecting you to do the virtually impossible. A few years in TV, though, will teach you how to get stuff done. It spoke to my constant need for novelty, my very low boredom threshold, and my desire to get out and make something. It will be no surprise to anyone that it turned out I had ADHD. Actually, that is true. But the point at which you learn to really make telly is when you get into an edit, and this is relevant to social media, because you have to sit there for hours sifting through endless amounts of footage, ruthlessly cutting it down until you can tell a story that you weave together that not only makes sense but flows along and is engaging and satisfying. I think the best way to make people care about something is to tell them a story, and the thing that telly taught me most is a little bit of how to do that, I like to think. Okay, I'm getting back to gardening now. Right, gardening. Ran alongside everything that I've done for well over a decade, and in the last couple of years has moved from a sideline into, strangely, sort of a new career. And the most exciting thing about that is that it's allowed me to spend more time talking about something that I am obsessed with and I love and I think is transformative and can change people's lives. I'm just going to have a bit of water now because I've got quite a dry mouth. So, I started growing food when I was 21, and it was an obsession that completely took over. At 23, I was cultivating a huge allotment in southeast London, and I remember actually getting back from a shoot in the Mediterranean with Yotta Motolengi, and I landed, I got home, I dumped my bag, I cycled to the allotment in the rain, and I harvested the first thing that I'd ever harvested on my allotment. And I can still picture it now. It was broad beans, there was a few beetroot, there was like green leaves and a little bit of garlic, and I just thought it was the most exciting thing. I can still remember it. I can remember the rain and being there, and just feeling like a huge weight had been lifted off me, because being away from home when you're young and you're doing an industry that's pretty tough is difficult, and to come home to my allotment just felt like being held by something that feels quite indescribable, but there you go. I'm trying to attempt to explain it to you. I would go to sleep thinking about vegetables. I'd wake up thinking about fruit bushes. I would spend hours at work surreptitiously buying seeds so that whenever my boss looked around, I was not working, which has really been a theme for a lot of my career. I spent as many hours as I could find down at my allotment, and any hours away from it, visiting it in my imagination, which usually meant I had a really glazed expression when anyone was trying to talk to me, especially between February and June. And it turns out actually that a garden is the perfect place for a human scientist. It is a living laboratory for experiments, a place of hope in a world that feels under attack. In a garden, you can see the product of human history in plants that are bred, selected, and collected from around the world. You can build new soil from old waste, helped by millions of interactions taking place between fungi, bacteria, and worms. And you can feel the sun on your face and think how, for all of human history that came before us, we grew our own food, and it is in our genes. Gardening is a web of connections where so many things meet. It was Richard Dawkins who actually coined the term meme. I talked about it, I think, in my Oxford interview. It was the thing that I criticised in his book, because I was like, well, how big is a meme? Because at what point is one bit of cultural transmission a meme, and when is it something smaller or bigger? Whatever I said anyway, it worked, I got in. But a meme, when Richard Dawkins wrote about it, meant a unit of cultural transmission analogous to a gene in genetics, so something that is passed on by imitation. So we're talking about cultural ideas that we create and we share, and the successful ones proliferate, and the less successful ones disappear. Gardening is not only in our genes, but it is also rich with cultural memes. The names of plants and how we grow them, how to eat them, how to sow seeds, do you do no-dig gardening, how you feed the birds, what the birds mean, what you call them, and how to prune a tree. These are all memes created and passed along from one gardener to another over generations, and nowadays, I'm thankful, via Instagram. It was my many years of TV that I think allowed me in the end to tell stories about a garden that connected with people, and I am really grateful, because I think gardens, balconies, whatever space you have, can be powerful. It also allowed me, in a more positive way, to revisit the issues that caused me so much anxiety when I was studying biological conservation. I'm not going to pretend things are looking rosy, but gardening at least feels like a positive place to start when sometimes we feel helpless. So, why should you garden? I've got 4 reasons here that I've written down, actually, or there's lots more than that. First and foremost, gardening makes you feel good. In 2004, an oncologist called Mary O'Brien injected soil bacteria into a cancer patient at the Royal Marsden in the hope it might help the human body fight off lung cancer. It didn't work, but it did do something else. It cheered them up. It acted like an antidepressant, and it's actually something that acts on your body when you go out and put your hands in the soil. And it's not just soil bacteria that makes gardening make you feel good. Even looking at plants can make you feel better. A Korean study from 2021 measured brainwaves and then did a questionnaire of subjective emotions on a group of people that spent 5 minutes each looking at 4 different things. No plants, a photo of plants, real plants, and fake plants. And it was only the real plants that resulted in significantly higher physiological relaxation and positive psychological effects versus all of the other things. So even though something might look virtually identical, it is only looking at a real plant, which I mean, like, fake plants are depressing, right? They're not only not real, but they're made out of plastic. Like, anyway, just don't get me, no, I just can't. But yeah, even if you're going to kill a real plant, at least try and have a real plant. Yes. And I've found and heard from so many gardeners about the sanctuary their garden has become, a place to go and restore yourself and find calm and joy and hope. To get lost in something that has a different pace and to notice small things that we miss in a busy life. You can build lost soil. Now, actually, one of the things that I remember really strikingly from biological conservation was about soil, which before that I don't think I'd ever thought about. And a major issue for humanity, actually, is that we are losing huge amounts of soil every year. And I mean, like, astronomical amounts. 75 billion tonnes eroded from arable lands around the world, which equates to 10 tonnes per person, or 9 kilos of soil being lost for every breakfast, lunch and dinner for every human on Earth. And I'm not going to claim that growing a few vegetables in your garden is going to make a huge difference. But given that it takes up to 1,000 years to make a single centimetre of soil, I think we've got to have a go. In addition to the loss of soil, the use of artificial fertilisers and pesticides has also degraded the soil that we do have. So, growing food, well, actually what I've written here is, the way we're growing food is destroying our future ability to grow food. And by growing your own food even just a little bit, organically, and making your own soil by composting is a meaningful intention to reverse the trend and a sign that you care. And I think caring is really the most important thing. I also think you can grow food that tastes better and is better for you, because our food is actually losing nutrients. 50 years ago, broccoli had more nutrients in than it does now. And that goes for a huge amount of different things that we grow, including wheat, less protein, less calcium. and they're all declining, partly because we now grow really much more fast-growing productive cultivars. So a broccoli that grows twice as fast doesn't have twice as much nutrients. It has just probably as much nutrients as a small heritage variety that took longer. And when you take your broccoli and you feed 4 people with it instead of 2, they're getting half as much nutrients as they would have got if you'd grown the slow-growing broccoli and you'd grown it in good soil that was alive and not being damaged by pesticides and fertilizers. So, I also think it tastes better. Pick a nice heritage variety, grow it in your garden in some soil that is rich with life, and it will taste good and it will be better for you. And finally, loss of biodiversity is something that we all know is happening, and it kind of is stark when you really look at the figures. Flying insects in the UK have dropped by 60% in the last 20 years. 20 years! 20 years is like a quarter of a lifetime. And we've more than halved the number of flying insects that there are. I mean, I don't like to think I'm not that old, but I remember being in a car that after a long journey would have insects splattered on the windscreen. And I just don't think it happens anymore. The UK is in fact one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. And so we urgently need to stop using pesticides that poison the environment. And then we need to create places for creatures to live, feed, reproduce, and rest. I want you to have a garden full of wild corners and leaf litter, rotting logs and ivy-covered walls, berries for birds and ponds for all kinds of critters, because if we don't give them that, there will be none left. In the last year, my garden has given me pears for a pear tart to take to my friend's civil partnership and the flowers to make her bouquet, which was a very special moment, actually. Radishes to pickle, huge tomatoes to make beautiful salads to share with my friends at dinner parties, birds to watch and their babies too, which was truly magical last year, blossoms full of bees, beetroots for salads that have leaves to turn into phyllo parcels, potatoes, kale, endless cucumbers, chilies, aubergines, and it has given me a place that I cannot wait to visit every time I step foot in my home. So finally, here is a little bit of take home after all of those kind of like heavy facts and everything. I'm going to give you 3 tips to get started growing things yourself. And actually, this is where I get to use my slides, so it's very exciting. I picked 3 growing projects that are the most simple. And actually, there's loads of more exciting ones in my book if you want to see that. But I wanted to pick things that anybody, and especially even students who are here, could do on the windowsills of the rooms or the kitchens that you guys have here. I remember I was here. So these are things you'll come back after the holidays and there'll be garlic greens growing absolutely everywhere. So the first one I want to talk about is garlic greens. And this has actually been just huge viral success. So it's also a good example, if you're interested, about how to make content that people like, share, comment, watch. And I think the reason it's been so successful is because you take something really familiar and you turn it into something that people didn't realise they could do. And you don't really need anything to do it. So you need a bowl and some water and a bulb of garlic. So you get your bulb of garlic from the supermarket, and you don't have to buy the kind of garlic that you buy if you're growing garlic in your allotment or your garden. This is very short. It's only lived for 2 or 3 weeks, so you don't need to go out and buy the expensive stuff at the garden centre. You're going to split up your bulb, peel your cloves, and then you're going to put them in a bowl with the flat end at the bottom and the pointy bit at the top. And I'm sorry if I'm being patronising, because probably you all know this anyway. And then you add a little bit of water, and after like 2 or 3 days, they'll start to grow. And actually, this is the perfect thing to do if you find a sprouting bulb at the back of your cupboard. And then they turn into this. And this is green garlic. And for many years, I grew garlic, and I'd always plant extra bulbs, and I would pull them up around about now, maybe between now and April, where they look like spring onions, and they taste like garlic, and they're kind of a prized ingredient among chefs. And actually, occasionally, you can find them in Asian supermarkets as well. And this is kind of like a little cheap version of it. So you literally just cut the garlic greens off and use them in whatever you want. I like to make garlic butter and put them into garlic flatbreads. I put them into pasta. I make them into green garlic mayo. Yeah, they're kind of omelettes, very nice as well. And yeah, it's just really easy and really simple, and just change the water for the first few days, otherwise it can go a bit garlicky. But that is garlic greens, so that's one to have a go at. Oh, and just, Nigella did this the other week, and she did a recipe with it, so if that's not a seal of approval, I don't know what is. Okay, number 2, mint. And you can grow mint from a packet from the supermarket, and the reason that I think this is a great herb to start with is because some herbs live for many years and some don't live for very long. And one of the things I wanted to explain in my book was that if you try to grow coriander and it goes to seed after a couple of months, that is not your fault. That is literally what it does. And so sometimes our expectations are what make us feel like a failure, when in fact we are just doing what nature does anyway. So the thing about mint is it lives for years. Don't ever put it directly in your garden because you'll never get rid of it. My allotment is about 95% mint at this point. But if you buy a packet like that, you don't even need to have a potted one, and you strip off the leaves and you put it in water. The second picture is, a few weeks later, they have roots. Pop them into a pot. That photo of mint at the end there, that is 2 years old. So that's that's that same pot. That's that same packet there. 19th of March. I think that was 2023. Anyway, so that pot of mint is still going, and it gets a little bit tired. I cut it back. I put some more compost on top. I water it. It pops back up. It's pretty tolerant of the cold. It might get its leaves burnt a bit, but it will come back. And yeah, mint tea. Dry the mint. Turn it into mojitos. Whatever you fancy. Number 3, microgreens. This is actually a new one. This isn't in my book, so, you know, I thought I'd share it with you today. These are sardine tins, and I love tinned fish. So, as my friends know, Sarah gave me some for Christmas. I'm very prone to obsessing about things, and I did have a real tinned fish moment, so that's how this came about, but great. This had 8 million views, so who's complaining? Microgreens are the tiny seedlings of edible plants. And I think something that's really interesting about when you grow your own is understanding the different stages that you can eat a plant at. And actually that's kind of what a lot of chefs get. They just get to eat things at different stages that you might not get, like garlic greens or green garlic or microgreens. They've just got someone to grow them something to a different stage that makes it very luxurious, but you actually can do it too. And this here is pink kale, but we've also got good old-fashioned mustard cress, curly cress, red radish, broccoli, and I just use something called coconut coir, which is a byproduct of coconut farming. It's like a coconut husk. And I fill up the tins, and I sprinkle the seeds on, and I stack them up and put them in my cupboard. After about 2 or 3 days, I take them out on the windowsill like that, give them a little spritz, and I think that's 9 days in. The last picture, you just chop them off, and you can put them in salads. You can put them in on top of a nice open sandwich. If you have loads of them at once, you can just make yourself a very nutritious salad, because talking about nutritional density, microgreens have more nutritional density than fully grown plants. So it's a good way to get your greens in. Actually, the other thing I'm doing at the moment is micro herbs, and it's an interesting distinction, interesting to me anyway, is that these grow in about 9 or 10 days, but herbs take a bit longer, but I think they're worth it because you're going to get something that's got a lot more unique flavour. You need less of it. It's going to look really beautiful. So at the moment I'm doing coriander, red vein sorrel, Thai basil, cinnamon basil, parsley, don't know the rest, but it's exciting. They're taking a little while. It's now four weeks in. I'm doing them in the same tins. Coriander's going really good. A couple of them, lemon balm. That's only just come up, but we've got to forgive it. Right. On the subject of growing food, those are 3 really easy ones that anybody can do. A few other things I would recommend. If you've got 1 pot, grow a tomato. And what I like to do, you can do a hanging basket tomatoes. The important thing to know about tomatoes is, are they going to grow up and long and keep fruiting continuously, or are they going to form like a small bush hanging basket type tomato and trail down, or are they just going to form a huge bush? So if you want to do a hanging basket tomato, get a variety that says it's trailing or hanging basket, hundreds and thousands. There's lots of ones that form tiny little tomatoes. You can do them in a hanging basket. If you're going to do it in a pot, you can growing upwards. There's a great variety called Sun Gold, which I find really successful every year, really sweet. Little orange tomatoes, and you can put 3 of them in a large pot with canes, and then you can just stick basil around the base of it, marigolds if you like, so you can treat a pot like a mini garden. I also love just things that I think are really good. Trays of salad, chard, and radishes. And potatoes in buckets. But, you know, whatever you fancy. I could fill any space with any number of plants, but those are my top ones. But most importantly, grow something that you want to eat and that you are excited about, so that you want to go out in the garden and have a look at your plant, because the most important thing about gardening is that you enjoy the process and not just the outcome, and that you want to visit your plants and you want to know how they're doing, and you pay attention, and that process gives you something. Because I think that if you care and it's exciting, you're actually drawn to it rather than it being a chore. And I think that plants die because people aren't that interested, and they put them in and they don't know how to keep them happy, and they walk away from it and they come back 2 weeks later and it's not even there because a slug's eaten it. So just feel like you're going into a relationship with your plants. Like just feel like you care about them and you want to visit them and you want to see them, and that watching them grow is as important as whether or not you get any fruit at the end. And I promise it will make you feel good. It's not like another chore to add to your list. It's just something that will make your life better. I'm obviously going to say that. Anyway, moving on to a different subject now, which is, let's see, compost. So this is about the many ways in which your garden can actually be sustainable and create this kind of circular garden economy that is really satisfying. Because I don't know about you, but I find it quite terrifying, and I buy lots of things from the supermarket, just how much like rubbish we generate and accumulate, and it makes me feel bad. I feel like I am weighed down by the weight of every single bit of plastic packaging that comes into my home. And so you can make compost, and instead of your food scraps going into landfill, where they will possibly release lots of methane, which has got 25 times more carbon greenhouse gas effect than carbon dioxide, although actually now they think maybe 8, but whatever. It's bad. You can turn it into something that locks carbon into the soil and feeds your plants and is feeding all that life. Like, soil is full of life and you feed it with organic matter. So if you want to get started with composting, very exciting. I've been talking to Helen about it just before this. You want to go for green waste and brown waste. So top tips are, don't just use kitchen scraps because it will go slimy and it won't be nice compost. What you need is to have plenty of brown waste too. So green waste is high in nitrogen. It's things like your kitchen veg scraps. It's your leaf trimmings. It's basically plant matter. Also tea bags, ideally you take the tea bags out of the bag, or you make sure you've got a plastic-free tea bag like Clipper or something like that, because there is microplastics in tea bags. Or coffee grounds as well. And then your brown waste is things like cardboard, it's leaves, it's paper. This is, in this picture here, wood shavings from a packaging box, egg boxes, and you want to get like half and half. There's loads of like science to the exact art of it, but essentially what I do is if I put in some kitchen scraps, I put some cardboard on top. And then actually the other thing that I've done in my compost bin, which was just the compost bin that was there when I arrived, is I've put an aeration tube in it, because otherwise you need to like turn it, because all of the microbes in there that are turning all of that waste into compost need oxygen, and so I've put a pipe down the middle of my compost bin with air holes in it, and then I don't need to turn it. And actually, I got 4 of these buckets of compost this year with my aeration tube, and last year I only got 1.5, so I think it's working. Anyway, I won't go any more about compost. There's more I was going to say, but I'm just going to stop, because I think just begin with that and see how you get on. And then a pond. So if you want to help wildlife in your garden, number 1, stop using pesticides if you do, although I kind of feel like lots of people know not to do that anymore. And then number 2, make space for nature, because if you create it, it will just arrive. Because I get asked by people, I did a video about my pond, it was the first ever kind of viral thing that I ever made, and people just fell in love with it, and I think it's because it's magical and I fell in love with it, and honestly there's nothing more exciting than baby frogs, and I just will never like not believe that. So if you want to make a pond, you actually don't need something very big. I used a container which was for like a water feature, but you could use half a barrel, you could use a pre-formed pond liner, you could use even an old washing up bucket, or like a nice sink if you plug the hole up. And mine's only 2 foot by 2 foot, and I have had hundreds of frogs in it, and this year I just went to visit for the first time this spring, and there was more frogs in it than I've ever seen. There was actually 4 frogs chilling out in the pond. They were kind of a bit disturbed because I was like, oh, what's under there? Oh, loads of frogs. And they were like, what are you doing? Anyway, so what you need to do is pick a spot in your garden that is sunny, but not going to bake in the heat all day, because you want your plants to grow and produce enough oxygen for all the creatures in there. And then you want to create layers. So what you're going to do is you're going to bury your container in the ground. If you've only got a patio, you can leave it above the ground. But if you can bury it in the ground, it just makes it easier for creatures to get in and out. And then you want to create different nooks and crannies. And I think that's probably good advice for kind of wildlife gardening in general, is like, it is leaf litter that is so important to things like beetles. Open ground is not good for like most insects because they've got no cover, and also like leaf litter is food for lots of insects. So basically you're going to do something like that, but inside the pond, which is you're going to use sand and gravel and pebbles and create little nooks and crannies, and you're going to then stack up rocks and maybe even use bits of slate on top of rocks to create ledges. And then in the shallow parts you can put your marginal plants. So we're talking like marsh marigold, water forget-me-not, irises, and they're going to sit half in the water. And then in the middle of your pond, I recommend a lily. You drop that right into the bottom, and it's going to send up its beautiful leaves, which gives places for things to hide under. And then you need an oxygenating weed, so something like water milfoil. And I actually find if my pond's getting a bit stagnant, I just buy more oxygenating weed, and it usually gets better. And then you're just going to fill it up with water, ideally rainwater, but if not, then just tap water, because there's nothing living in it at this point, which does have a lot of chlorine in it, but the chlorine should evaporate off by the time it goes through a process of succession. So this is kind of maybe what you remember if you ever did like GCSE, A-level biology, is your pond is gradually turned from like a lifeless thing into something that is like really established and teeming with life, and there's a few painful stages along the way. It might go green and slimy, it might get full of mosquito larvae, but that means it's happening, so this is good. And when it is kind of swampy and full of like little critters, have a real look in there, because there's all kinds of mad things going on in a pond when it's first starting going through those early stages. You'll see water fleas in there. There's these little cocoons that bloodworms build all over the inside of a pond when it's first establishing, or at least I found it to be. And then if you're lucky, you might get dragonfly nymphs, caddisfly larvae, you might get tadpoles, newts, and they really do just arrive because they can travel pretty far. And my pond's actually, as I was telling Helen earlier, now full of clams. And everyone's like, where did they come from? But you don't say that about water snails, do you? You kind of expect water snails to appear. Clams, on the other hand, less expected. I was like, what are these? They're tiny little white, and I've looked them up, European fingernail clams, and sometimes I go out and they're just like sticking their little clam tongues out, and I'm happy they're there, you know. I'm even happy when the pond is stagnant and there's a leech in there, to be honest. They don't drink your blood, don't worry. So that's it, build a pond if you can. Anyway, I think that might be the last slide. So let me have a look back at what I've said here. Oh, and if you can, plant a fruit tree. I've had my pear tree now for 10 or 11 years, and I've had it on an allotment. It's lived in my parents' garden, it's lived in my garden, it's lived in the ground, it's lived in a pot, and then in the pot and the ground again. And last year I got something like 25 of the most delicious and beautiful pears that I've ever had in my life. And every year I become more and more attached to this pear tree. And at the moment its buds are just like about to burst into an amazing array of beautiful flowers that are going to be full of bees, and then tiny little pears are just so cute. And the pears I get are huge and delicious, and as I say, I turn them into a tart for my friend's civil partnership. And so if you do ever manage to grow a pear, Angela Hartnett's pear frangipane tart recipe is fantastic. But it is that idea of investing time in something, and the longer you wait for it and the more time you spend with it, the more valuable it becomes. So to round off, I just want to say that my advice, for what it's worth for anyone that cares, is to always do something that you think is interesting. And I can't say that's actually been the most financially wise advice I could give, but I do think that being passionate about something is infectious, and I promise that it will take you places that you don't expect. doing what I thought was interesting brought me to a degree in human sciences. My love of food allowed me to make TV shows with some of the best loved chefs and travel to some of the most amazing places. And that all led me to growing food and sharing my garden, now with 1.75 million followers and something like 10 million people every month on Instagram. It's allowed me to write a book, and most importantly, it's allowed me to share the thing that I love. And I just didn't really have a choice, because I can't do things that I'm not interested in, which is why I was not very good when I was trying to learn to read in primary school. Which is ironic, really, because I've now written a book, which is my final slide. No, that's just great pictures of a garden. There's the bouquet. There's my radishes, and there's, oh, do you know what, aubergines. I'm going to grow some absolutely wicked aubergines this year, but anyway, that's for another day. So, there's my book, and it's simple projects to nurture food, flowers and wildlife in any outdoor space. And my hope is that above all, it will give you confidence if you feel like you don't know where to begin, and that you don't have to be any kind of person or any kind of gardener or even have a garden to embark on this journey, which I think is so innately woven into what it is to be human, that I'm going to keep telling everyone about it for the rest of my life. So thank you very much. That's all I've got to say.
Well, thank you, Martha, for a fantastic talk and for showing me what I love about Mansfield, which is people are most passionate about things. It's exciting listening to somebody who's passionate about something. So thank you very much. I was very interested, you were talking about gardens connecting you with people, but you're also talking about things you do on your windowsill or maybe in your backyard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you think gardens connect people, unless people are Instagram influencers?
I think it connects us to the history of what it is to be human, but also it's something that, like anything you're passionate about, you connect with lots of people that are passionate about the same thing. I mean, the first thing we talked about was gardening. My mum is an incredible gardener, and every time I see her, we talk about plants together. But also, I do a lot of I've got into more community gardening, and on my estate where I live, estate not in a fancy way I'd like to stay, there's a community garden there, and I was feeling really bleak about current things that are going on in the world the other morning, and it was the first day that I was due to go and help out on the community allotment, and I got there and it was really sunny, and there was 5 people from my estate, and we fixed the polytunnel, which the foxes had ripped loads of holes in, and we tidied everything up, and Alison, who's very lovely and organises it all, got this little tea kettle out and made tea on the allotment with little sticks, and we had biscuits. And I just think, like anything you're passionate about, and sharing knowledge and sharing information and being together, doing something that feels very nourishing is inherently a way, I think, to connect with people. And I've also made really good friends through the world of Instagram gardening, and I didn't really set out to make friends, but there's another Instagram gardener, and she came to my book launch and stayed over when she did that, and we went to a Kew Gardens exhibition together. And there's other authors who've got books coming out, been invited to their book launches and things. So I think just the nature of having a passion is that it connects you with people. And I think gardening is something that, yes, all of us who love it can just get so excited about. And once you get excited about something, then it connects you to people.
I forgot to say that for people who are here who are Mansfield students, the librarians have got some coir stuff and seeds, so you can give it a go and pop up before you leave tomorrow morning and pick some up. Yeah. Also to say that the reason I saw Martha on Instagram is that my daughter, who's 22, sent me the video of the pond. Yes. So it's an intergenerational thing too. Yeah. I'm not going to hog the questions. I'm going to hand it out and see if anyone has any questions or observations they want to.
I can't promise I'll know the answer, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Hang on, can you just wait for the microphone? So.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you very much for that. You mentioned cocoa coir. I'm never sure how you pronounce it, but what about hydroponics? I mean, have you dabbled in, or would you think hydroponics should be encouraged in terms of indoor garden, people have a lot of space, learning about perhaps the future of agriculture, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. It's not something that I have done, although I did get to film at an amazing hydroponic farm in London a few years ago. It was actually aquaponics, which is something I think is quite cool, where you have fish growing on one side and then you have plants growing on the other. And the fish poo basically goes through a buffering process. It's passed through the plants, and they take the nutrients from the water and grow, and then it's kind of a circular system. So I think there's lots of really exciting things that could potentially be done with aquaponics. I think I'll give it a go, but at the moment I'm kind of like, in my outdoor space I am quite into the soil, and indoors I've just actually got like a grow light area, and I know that they do hydroponics with that. So I think, you know, there's lots to be said for it, and also a lot of commercial growing kind of happens in a sort of semi-hydroponic way. I filmed at Chili Farm where they just drip feed water and nutrients into plants basically. So I think there's loads of really interesting stuff, and I think that anything that allows people to have a go at growing in whatever space they have is a good thing. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, hand up here.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could go, I guess, deeper into the composting process and, like, I guess, like, sort of like the timeline when we should start incorporating
right,
soil.
yeah.
I think, like, and also just, like, how, I guess, specific should we be with it? Because I know I've had some experiences where, like, I'm not sure if, like, how I should dispose of my food scraps and, like, you know, like, oils that I use or, like, sauces that I use, what should be beneficial.
Should and shouldn't go in a compost bin. Okay, so like a classic compost bin, you shouldn't put food like pasta, oil, rice, anything like, maybe a little bit, cooked food basically is a bit of a no, as is kind of meat, dairy, anything like that. So I'm talking about like kitchen veg scraps, ideally raw. I'll get on to another actually way that you can compost everything, but it takes about a year to compost, and there's a couple of different ways of doing it. And I would say, in my small space, I do the most basic form of composting, which is like cold composting. I just add to it continuously. Sometimes there's weed seed still in my compost at the end because it hasn't got hot. But yeah, you want to add your veg scraps, your grass clippings in layers, and it needs maybe a little bit of water if it dries out. Mine's always got usually enough moisture, and I have it in a slightly shady spot. Although, actually, Helen has a great tip, which is to put it by like a warm air.
But not everyone has the student tumble dryer outlet by their composting.
Yes, which makes it really warm, because heat does make compost go faster, and you can actually buy heat bins, which are kind of big insulated boxes, and that means that the heat, because as it breaks down, all the bacteria in there, like, it gives out heat, and your compost can get really hot. And if you have the luxury of having enough waste all at once and building a huge compost pile, it will get really hot and it will steam. Like, I actually can't do that in my garden because I don't have enough waste. So yeah, you're waiting about a year. And in my compost bin, because I keep adding to it continuously, when I do finally empty it, I take the top layer off and I just get the stuff from the bottom, and I sieve it because mine's full of all kinds of stuff. And then I put it all back in the bin. Yeah, and then you can kind of like use it in your garden however you like. But I would also say there are other ways that you can compost. My compost bin is full of worms, which not all compost bins have to be, but they do help break down things quicker, and they also kind of add a bit of magic to the compost through their digestion, which is basically worm poo is good for your garden. And then the other thing that I'm experimenting with at the moment, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means, is something called bokashi composting. So it's actually a thing that came from Japan, and you get these grains which have got like a kind of yeast bacteria in them, and you add it to all food scraps, so you can compost fish and meat and everything. And what it does is it ferments all of the waste, and then you can add it to your compost bin. It's a bit more complicated though, because you have to do it in an anaerobic environment and you need to tap off the liquid. But if you're kind of interested in like, how can I be zero waste and use absolutely everything, then definitely like look into it. But yeah, I think composting is one of those things that like, you just have to kind of have a go. And if it comes out really sticky, it means you've not got enough brown waste in, so just try and adjust it. And I think the most important thing is people don't realise that you need at least 50, if not 75%, like dry leaves, wood shavings, cardboard, paper, all of that dry stuff. It's only like less than half is the food waste. So that's what I would say.
Ros.
Thank you. Hello, Martha.
Hello, Ros.
I'm not as you know, I teach literature, and I wanted to ask you a bit about sort of the poetics of gardening. As you started talking, it was just lovely to hear you talk, and I was thinking about writers I love like Thoreau in Walden. James Thompson has fantastic description of insects in his Summer. This is just specifically about writing the book, or how you wrote the book. Did you? What process did you use to write? Because it seems to me that is rather different from talking to a camera, showing your stuff,
Yeah.
and waxing about it. So I'm just intrigued. I haven't seen the inside the book.
Yes.
So how were you thinking about using language? I'm always very struck when I watch cooking programs or gardening programs at the way that, the poetics of people talking about the thing that they're doing.
Yes, I think it's interesting that you'd say that, because something that I have really found and lent into in the content, which I do write sometimes as well before I speak it, is that some of it's become a little bit poetic, I think. Or at least people come to my content often for the words, and also, weirdly, the way that I say them, apparently. And so that's something I've lent into and done more of, but I wouldn't say I always say I'm not hugely cultured, and that I never really felt like a writer. I joined a book group just after, during COVID. I was invited actually by an Oxford English alumni, and when I got to the book group, everyone in it was very literary. They'd done English at Oxford, and I felt totally inadequate. But she always said I had a really different take on things, which was very nice. And she read the beginning of my book and was very kind about it. So the thing that's, I think, interesting to your point about my book is it's very wordy. I think it went over words by about 15,000. It's a written book. It is not like a photo, really stripped back picture book. And I wanted to take people with me by explaining things in a way that felt accessible and that they'd understand. In terms of I definitely romanticise and have a little bit of a kind of poetic element to particularly the descriptive introduction, which is about my mum's garden. She's up there. Hi, Mum. And my dad, who does do... I need to mention, actually, my dad comes to the allotment and is a wonderful helper, and I always talk about my mum being an amazing gardener and never mention my dad, so he's there as well. I love him. Look at them both, they're so cute. Anyway, I write...
probably think the same about you.
Yeah. I write really about my mum's garden in a way that I just... there was no process, Ros. I just sat down and I thought, how does it make me feel? And I put words on a page, and I have no concept of how you write a book, but people liked it and were nice to me about it. And the copy editors and the people that are really helpful and know about grammar, they all said they really enjoyed it. And the feedback that I've had so far, people have been really nice about it. And so what I tried to do was speak in a language that was just how, that was equivalent to how I talk, but just a little bit more considered, and that hopefully transported you a little bit to a place. But it just is how I write, and it just came out like that. So I hope you don't think it's rubbish.
It's not rubbish. But I think it is interesting about the link between gardens and minds, and the way people write about gardens, and it's a very deep poetic thing, isn't it? There's a book.
I think it's emotional, it draws on you, and it's so sensory, and I think that's what you want to convey, is that when you're in a garden, I want you to feel what it's like to be surrounded by plants, and to listen to the hum of insects, and to feel what sunshine feels like surrounded by things that you've cared for, and it's trying to convey that sense, I guess, is the way that I've tried to use language, although I would never have stopped to think about it, because I'm just I write quite quickly, and then I don't necessarily I agonise over it a little bit, but I'm not someone who spent a lot of time writing each sentence. I just tried to I would wait and wait and wait until I felt like it was a moment when I could find something to say, and then I would write as much as I could, and then I'd stop and have an apple, go into the garden, and then,
Just like Thoreau and Thompson, actually.
There we go.
Okay, I've got one more hand, and then, I'm going to have two more hands. I'm going to have that one, and then the person up there, and then we're going to let you go and sign some books for people.
Hello.
Hello.
I just wondered if you ever see your combination of TV knowledge and gardening coming together and maybe a programme one day, because I absolutely love your videos.
That's my friends here. I'm actually on telly on Monday. I'm going to be on a show called Alan Titchmarsh's Gardening Club, where I'm doing some bits and pieces. I was on Gardener's World last year as well, actually. It's been quite weird and not doing more stuff in front of the camera, because it's like being at work anyway. Because as a director, you have to tell people what you think they should say. And now I just tell other people what I'm going to say and like how they should film it. But I don't know, we'll see. Like, yeah, I am not doing my TV job at the moment because I'm a freelancer, and it's been so busy with the book that I'm just seeing what happens. I'm going to be on Gardener's Question Time coming up as well, only as a little feature. But yeah, lots of these things are kind of like suddenly falling into my lap, and I'm up for doing them, and we'll see what happens.
And then there's just one person lurking in the corner there. Okay.
Hello, Martha.
Hello.
My name is Ren. I'm a study abroad student in here.
Yeah.
And I did a research with Armenia State University of Botany about the composting and actually the impact of caffeine on growth and sprouting of seeds. And I found out that during composting or even during the watering process, when you add caffeine, it actually stunts the growth. I never had a chance to discuss it with a professional, and I was wondering about your opinion.
Well, that's interesting. I don't add coffee to my compost bin because I don't drink much coffee. But I can't say, that's very interesting to know, and I can't say that I ever applied that level of scientific rigour to my composting process, but I think that's very interesting to know. It just reminds me, this is not actually related to composting, but I did film something about caffeine and the way in which it can be toxic. It is toxic to a lot of insects, and it's a method that plants actually use to deter things from eating them. But in small doses, it attracts plants to flowers, and citrus flowers actually contain caffeine. That's just a side note. But I'm not surprised to hear that, actually. What's your next plan with this bit of information? Are you going to put it to the test?
Well, I'm going to try composting with
Yep.
caffeine grounds and then comparing it to regular compost with, the scraps of foods. But I imagine the result is going to be the same as before. And
Yeah.
I did test it with a control group of water. I actually tested it with tomato seeds. And either way, the water performed way better than coffee grounds, and I imagine same is going to happen with compost.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting, because one thing that I did actually come across is that, people say citrus is bad for worms, for example. And I put citrus in my compost bin. And I read something that said that as long as all the other conditions are correct, like the worms can still thrive in the environment. Of course, that's not the same as whether the compost is good for your plants, but it's interesting to see what the transformative process of composting might do to the product and how much of the caffeine remains. But let me know what happens. I'd love to, because I do put tea bag, compostable tea bags. I do put compostable tea bags in my compost, so maybe I'm stunting my plants. But this is, we'll have to see. I'll have to do some more experiments, but very interesting to know. Thank you.
Well, they look all right to me. Thank you very much, Martha, for coming back after I fangirled you at a Gordy and said, you must come and give a public talk. Thank you for finishing the term with something so cheery and uplifting, and sharing us all, bringing us together to share that. That's the last of the Mansfield Public Talks for this term. There's a full programme next term, which will be on the website in the next week or two. So if you're interested, do come along or tell people who might be interested. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you all for coming and for your enthusiasm and questions. If you want to go on asking Martha questions, you have to buy a book, or at least pretend to buy a book, and there aren't that many actually, for a few. So Martha will be out there signing books for a little while, and I'm going to give her a drink. But thank you, Martha.
Thank you. And thank you, It's Helen's birthday today as well.
Oh,
She
yeah.
invited me
Yes.
on her birthday to speak. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.